Data is information. At its core, all that any program does is manipulate data. This could be data that users enter on websites to tell you what kind of food they want to order, or data about protein structure that we use to simulate protein folding. There are many kinds of data in C0, and data has to be classified based on types. This is a safe practice which you'll come to appreciate as you use more of the language. Some of the basic types that we'll talk about right now are integers, booleans, and characters. First, let's look at integers. Integers are the integers you know and love from math class. For example, 8 is an integer, 42 is an integer, 0 is an integer, -1 is an integer. This should be fairly straightforward. One thing that takes a little bit more time to grasp, though, is that integers can be entered in multiple ways and still have the same values. For example, let's consider integers that we enter in base 16. We can tell C0 that we want to enter integers in base 16 by putting 0x before the integer. So let's look at 0x2. 0x2, when we enter it, shows up as 2. Notice that when C0 shows the integer back to us, it's showing it in base 10 decimal, or the number system that you're familiar with. But let's look at a larger number entered in base 16. Let's try, for example, 0x20. Now, if we do a little bit of math, we can figure out that the number that is 20 in base 16 is 32 in base 10. So sure enough, when we enter this, C0 shows us back the number as 32 in base 10. If we enter 32 in base 10, we get the same number back. So what's important to realize here is that we entered the exact same number twice. There is no difference between 0x20 and 32 within C0. There are different representations of the exact same number. C0 is just nice and lets us enter numbers in different ways depending on what seems convenient for us. This will become a little bit clearer later on. Now let's look at booleans. Booleans are something that you may not have heard of before, but at their core they're very simple. Booleans have one of two possible values. They can either be true or they can be false. At C0 we enter these just as the lowercase words true and false. Booleans, despite their simplicity, can be used to do a lot of powerful heavy lifting that we'll get to later on. Finally, let's look at characters. Characters are exactly what you would expect, single characters from words. Characters can be things like a, they can be special characters like %. We'll learn a little bit more about characters and how they interact with integers later on, but for now, let's just suffice to show that each character has a number that corresponds to it. This is called its ASCII value. You may be familiar with these. From any character, we can get its ASCII value using the char ord function. It might not be clear right now what a function is. We'll get to that later. Just keep in mind that each character corresponds to a number. We can go from that character to that number, and also back from the number to the character using another function. Next, we'll learn a little bit about how we can actually combine pieces of data using something called operators.